What is up, guys? Team Yugafields here with another video, and today we're going to be doing something that I asked people if they wanted me to do, and from the thumbs up that I received on the Burning Abyss deck profile, looks like you guys definitely wanted me to do this. And this is a test hand video for the BA list that I posted on my channel. And not only is it going to be test hands, it's going to be me going in depth with theory with the deck and just my personal opinion as to certain lines of play, certain ratios and things like that. So you'll see me discuss all of that as we do test hands, and obviously I'll progress from there and show you guys all of the neat stuff that the deck can do. But before we hop into this, if you guys are not subscribed already, make sure you go ahead and smash that subscribe button, turn the notification bell on, and obviously give the video a thumbs up. It does help a whole lot with the algorithm. And, leave a comment, tell me how much you love Burning Abyss. So without further ado, let's take a look at some sweet Burning Abyss content. Everybody, welcome back to the channel. So we're going to go ahead and jump into this with a test hand right off the bat. If you guys have not already checked out the Burning Abyss profile, please go and check it out. It's going to help you understand basically what my list looks like. That way you can get an idea as to what we're playing in order to counter the meta, and just give you a little bit of insight as to what the deck does if you don't know what the cards in the deck do already. So I'm already mixing this up. This should be in a pretty well shuffled state at this point, but figure at least we could make it look half decent so everyone sees a solid shuffle on screen. Looks a little better that way. We will leave our extra deck face up so you guys can see the extra deck too, because I feel that, it'd be a little weird if we didn't have that in frame. So we're going to start off with 5 cards, assuming that we're going first. Now, in our opening hand, we don't have the best hand. I'll start off by saying that. This is not a fantastic hand. However, we do have enough to completely interrupt our opponent's board, and they're probably not going to be able to do much on their turn because we're going to completely interrupt their turn. So essentially, we're going to set 3 in that of Karma Cut, Dino-Miscus, and Ice Dragon's Prison, and we're going to pass. And what would happen on our opponent's turn is that we would be able to flip the Dino-Miscus, pitching the Farfa, and then we banish 2 cards off of that. And then additionally, we can Ice Dragon's Prison. I would not Karma Cut because we'd be discarding Celestial. When we do activate the IDP, we will trigger the Dino-Miscus to summon itself back out onto the field, which then for our following turn, we draw Skarm, which isn't great, but we do get to banish one of our opponent's cards again too with the Karma Cut, which is pretty good, and then the Skarm can search for something like a tour guide. Not a fantastic opening hand, but I do have to show the bad opening hands. That way everybody at least knows what the bad opening hands look like and what can happen with the deck, because let's be realistic, not every single hand is going to be perfect, and you have to know how to play your bad hands better than you know how to play your good hands. So let's go ahead and take a look at another test hand here. Explain everything as far as what I would do, the reasonings why. That was obviously a very slow hand that we would have to hope for the best for, but we'll go ahead and start again, opening up with something that is definitely better, significantly better actually. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the tour guide. Obviously, we would hope that we don't get hand trapped. That's, the one big downfall of summoning tour guide, but let's assume that we don't. Now, most people would go for a Graph here or a Rhino Warrior. I am not going to be doing that. I'm actually going to be going for a Libic. So the Libic comes out, and I don't think going for Graph here is appropriate, because let's say your opponent is, for whatever reason, holding off on their Ash and they don't Ash your tour guide, or they forget to. If you summon a Graph here and then you mill off the Dante and try and use the Graph, then they're going to remember to use their Ash at that point, or they're going to use it because they waited purposely. So instead, we do the Libic because we have the Seer in hand. We make the Dante and we mill 1 card, which is going to be a Rhino Warrior. And I apologize for any glare. I'm going to try and make sure that's not too obnoxious. But essentially the Rhino Warrior would be Chainlink 1 and Libic would be Chainlink 2, summoning the Seer. And the Rhino is actually a really good mill because we can send a Scarm now. And sending a Scarm is fantastic in this scenario because sending the Scarm allows us to have access to a search at the end of the turn, which is really, really powerful. So from here, we're going to be link summoning. We're going to link our Seer and our Dante away, and we're going to be making our Verte Anaconda. When we do so, the Seer will be Chainlink 1 to summon Dante, and Dante will be Chainlink 2 to add Seer. So this comes out on the field. From here, we discard our Seer and special summon a Beatrice. And then after we summon the Beatrice, we can go for the Verte combo, and we can send our Fusion Destiny, which is going to allow us to dump our Dasher and our Celestial. There's the Celestial. So these both go to grave, and we get our DPE. And then from there, we get to essentially just set 3 cards and then go end phase Scarm. Now, most people would grab Tour Guide. I am not grabbing Tour Guide. I'm actually going to be grabbing Graph. The reason that we grab Graph is that we have Dinomischus. So what we can do during our opponent's turn is we can actually pitch the Graph with the Dinomischus. And in doing that, it allows you to special a Scarm, which deck thins even further, because then you'll get to search with that Scarm for a Tour Guide during your opponent's end phase. So it's basically just a way of deck thinning and getting to the cards that you need. But on our opponent's turn, keep in mind, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 interruptions. 5. And if we need a 6th, we don't have to summon the Scarm. We can always summon a Farfa, and the Farfa will be auto-popped because we control 2 non-Burning Abyss monsters. I'm sorry, 3. And then your Farfa is another interruption too. So we have possible 6 interruptions on this board, which is absolute insanity. That's what happens when you open up Tour Guide and trap cards. Like you can end on a board like this. Tour Guide alone gets you access to the Verte, the DP, and the Beatrice, which is extremely powerful. Your Beatrice can also send something such as your Absolute King Backjack, which has the possibility of getting you access to yet another trap card. So you do have a lot of routes that you can go. And then on our next turn, if we do end up using the Graph to special the Scarm and search the Tour Guide, we can normal the Tour Guide, hope that we draw another trap, and then we can banish our Celestial and your Dasher, and then we can draw 2 cards, which is even crazier. So just off of that, we essentially have game. Most people would probably scoop because there's not much that any decks in the current meta can do against this unless they main deck cards like Evenly Matched. And even then, if they do main deck Evenly Matched, I would probably keep the DP, and then I'd chain the Beatrice to send either a Backjack or a Seer. Most likely a Backjack because the Beatrice is, or I'm sorry, the Dante that we detach from the Beatrice is going to add back a Seer. So we don't even have to worry too much about that. Basically, you just get to continue playing the game with, probably 2 interruptions, which is more than enough to kind of shut your opponent's turn down. So let's go ahead and shuffle all this back up, and we'll hop on to another test hand. So I said I was going to do another test hand, but I remembered in between setting up the shuffles and everything and just kind of getting the deck all mixed up again that I want to show you guys an important combo that I didn't really showcase before, and I just didn't feel that like it was something that needed to be explained, but now I feel that it really does need to be explained because it's actually very important. And that is opening something like Fusion Destiny and Tour Guide, because I discussed how opening Tour Guide is 1 card combo, and if you open up like Rhino and a random BA, it's combo. If you open up a Graph and a random BA, it's combo. So I'm going to talk about opening Tour Guide and Fusion Destiny, or any of those other scenarios with Fusion Destiny in your hand. That way you can make an even stronger board. So you do your Tour Guide effect, which gets your Graph. Your Graph is going to overlay into your Dante, which you will mill only 1 because you don't want to mill the DP engine. So you mill a random card. Your Graph effect triggers, summons your Seer. Then you're going to link summon. And normally we'd go for the Verte, but we already have the Fusion Destiny. So we actually make our IP Masquerena, and then our Seer and Graph will trigger. So the Graph, our Seer and Dante. Dante will add the Seer back, Seer will summon the Dante, so on and so forth. You then pitch the Graph to make our Beatrice. And then from here you activate Fusion Destiny, which is going to send our Dasher and Celestial. And in doing so, we get our DPE out without Verte, which is really good because we're still up 2,000 life points from it. The cool part about this play is that you have so many interruptions just off of this. Never mind, you know, the fact that you're going to have even more interruptions if you have trap cards, because realistically, this is only opening Tour Guide and Fusion Destiny that gets you here. So if you have trap cards, your combo goes even further, which is crazy. Really, really crazy. So we're going to say that we start with the Beatrice. The Beatrice detaches the Dante and sends something like Backjack. Now, obviously, I stacked the cards to show you guys the combo. The rest of the deck is not stacked. I'm going to send the Backjack, and then Dante's effect is going to trigger to add back Seer from our grave to hand. And it'll also trigger our Backjack at the same time, which will allow us to rearrange the top 3 cards. Trap Trick, Strike, and Torrential, you couldn't have gotten a better top 3. I'm going to leave that the way it is, so the Trap Trick is on top. We then get to add that Seer back, and then we can banish our Backjack and set the Trap Trick from the top of the deck. Now, this is like super, super nuts because we have so many plays that we can do here. It's insanity, absolute insanity. So we can Trap Trick, which is, you know, going to be very, very strong. And we're going to banish either a Karma Cut or a Dino-Miscus. It doesn't matter which one. It depends on your matchup, I guess. So in this scenario, let's say that we banish a Dino-Miscus to set another Dino-Miscus, because that's just pretty simple. So now that we've set that up, we have a discard outlet, which is going to be extremely powerful. So what I would say is one of the most important things to note is that we would have more cards in hand. We'd have blank cards in our hand. So there are going to be more things that we can discard. Obviously, I can't showcase that right now because I'm just explaining with what I went off of with 2 cards. So essentially, you're going to have more cards to discard, so you're going to have multiple ways of doing this. So you'd activate your Dino-Miscus and pitch the Seer to banish one of your opponent's cards. Seer would then trigger to get Dante back onto your board. Your Dante and your IP effect can link itself with the Dante, and we would get a Nightmare Unicorn, which, like I said, we would have other cards in hand, so we can pitch them off of the Unicorn effect. The Dante will also trigger, and we can add either Graph or Seer back. Usually we go for the Seer just because it's the Dante Seer loop, which is very, very strong. So far, we have managed to remove a card with Dino-Miscus, shuffle a card with Unicorn, and then we can also use the DPE to pop one of our opponent's cards and then special it back during the next standby. So just off of the Fusion Destiny alone, you have the Fusion Destiny Tour Guide combo alone, you have at least 3 interruptions, which is really, really strong. I figured I would point that out because I only ever talk about the Tour Guide 1-card combo. I don't talk about opening up the 2-card combo of that of opening a Tour Guide and a Fusion Destiny. So I figured I would at least bring that up. The other cool part is that if you have something like a Farfa in your hand and you do a discard off of Unicorn or Dino-Miscus, you're banishing 2 cards, which is even crazier. So keep in mind that something like that is also very, very important. Like, you can get more and more interruptions depending on what you have in your hand, which is absolutely nuts. But let's go ahead and do another test hand. Okay, so we're going to do another test hand here. This is probably going to be the last test hand. I'm just going to show you guys how I would play one of my turns out here. And hopefully it's a good one. We don't want a terrible test hand. That would be very, very sad. If it is a bad test hand, I'll just shuffle it back up and we'll do another one. That way we can go ahead and actually see something decent, and I could talk you guys through certain combos. So there's 4 and 5 cards. So we've got a Fusion Destiny, a Torrential, an Ice Dragons, and an Imperial Order. And we have the Farfa, which doesn't really matter in this hand right now. But basically, this hand, as crazy as it sounds, this hand is actually pretty busted. Like, you can just do your Fusion Destiny. If they don't ash you, you're basically off to the races, and you should win this game. I mean, even if they do ash you, you have a decent chance of still slowing them down and kind of forcing them to into a simplified game state, which once you force them into a simplified game state with trap cards, you're probably going to walk away with a win. So we do our Fusion Destiny to bring out our DPE. And from there, we're literally just going to be setting 3 back row and passing. And obviously you can, play your zone placements how you'd like to play around mech knights or whatever you're scared of at your locals or other events. We keep the Farfa in hand. There's no reason to do anything with this whatsoever. So basically what's going to happen is our opponent is going to be shut out of spell cards. We're going to be able to pop this and pop one of their cards. We can then torrential them, and then we can IDP them, and then we would draw a card for a turn, and we draw a torrential. The DP comes back, and they probably don't have any monsters on the board because of what we did. So we get to poke for 25, we get to set another torrential and pass, then we can DP pop again, and then we can torrential again, and then we come back to our turn, we draw, and then once again we are just looping. This deck is kind of just like a bunch of loops. It's essentially just Seer looping Dante and DP looping itself. Like that's basically what it is, and then you have trap cards as your friends to just help you out. The cool part about drawing the Fiend Griefing though is that with this particular turn loop, when you have this set, after you do a pop on one of their cards or beforehand, you can Fiend Griefing, and you can send something like Graph or Scarm, probably your Scarm, because, well, it depends on what they have for follow-up, but typically it's going to be your Scarm. That way you can get more searches, you know, because then at the end of the turn you could grab like a Graph or a Tour Guide. I would recommend grabbing a Graph because you well, actually no, I'm sorry, I forgot we had the Imperial Order up. You would grab a Tour Guide because you can't do the special summoning of BAs from your hand. So you would go ahead and you'd get the Tour Guide search after sending the Scarm, and then we draw for our turn. We get a strike, which is good. During the standby, this comes back. If they have anything on board, you just pop this and whatever they have, because they might have like an imperm set or something. So if they have an imperm set or something else, you can just DP to get it away, and then you can just go ahead and normal your Tour Guide, and then from there you can do some really cool stuff. You get your Graph out to the board, which is very, very strong. Most scenarios you're going to see that I go for something like a Dante here. Now you have multiple routes, and this is why this last test hand I really wanted to go in depth and explain a lot more. So I'm going to talk about the different routes on this one because I think the different routes are actually very important to discuss. So your first route is that you can make a Dante. That's first route. We're assuming they have no cards because we've just used our DP and our trap cards to basically out their resources. Now with this scenario, if they don't have any monsters, you can attack, and as I've mentioned in previous test hands, you can go into a Downward Magician and a Zeus afterwards. You don't have to mill if they don't have any cards on their board, because why would you? Like, you're basically setting up another Zeus wipe, which is really powerful. So that's one option. You can go into your Dante and do so. We have another option, which is linking our Tour Guide and our Graph for Cherubini, and then the Graph effect triggers, which would summon a Seer. So there's a Seer. And then we can use the Cherubini, and the Cherubini is actually going to send a Libic because we have a Farfa in hand, and we get to special the Farfa off of the Libic. And this is where it gets pretty spicy. So now we've got all these cards in grave here. Keep in mind the Scarm was sent during our opponent's last turn. So what we can do is we can actually link the Seer and the Farfa, and we can make something like IP Masquerena. And then the Seer is going to trigger, and so is the Farfa, because, you know, well, like I said, we could assume they don't have any monsters, or maybe they have one and you can out it with the Farfa. But the Seer is actually going to summon back the Scarm. And from here, so the Scarm doesn't get destroyed because it does point to the Cherubini, or the Cherubini points to it, which is pretty important to note. From here, you have two options. You can either link all three of these together, or you can kind of push even further depending on how far you want to go with this. If you want to make like a Nightmare Unicorn, because you have to out cards on the board, then you can link the Scarm and the Cherubini for the Unicorn. Or if you want to link just the IP and the Cherubini for an access code, you can do that too. So the way I'm going to look at it is I'm going to say that we went Scarm and the Cherubini for Unicorn. If they have something, you discard the strike. If not, you just hold on to the strike. Then you link these two for the access code. So the access code can target the Unicorn, and then it's up to 53. And then if you have to, you do have at the minimum one. You only have one pop by banishing a dark, which is pretty good. You have a strike and you have 5300 that's hitting, and then at the end of the turn you do have a Scarm search for another Tour Guide, which is pretty important. So keep in mind this deck is very, very grindy. It's not a fast-paced deck. It's very, very control-based with like 1 or 2 combos that you can do. Like, you're basically doing the same combos over and over and over again and setting trap cards along with them. Like, it's a very, very simple deck to learn how to do the basic stuff with. It's just mastering the technical play, and it's going to vary per matchup, but considering I just did some test hands, I'm going to go ahead and show you guys some side decking stuff that I think is important to note for certain matchups. Okay, so let's talk about side decking, because I feel like that's something that is kind of tough for people to get a good grip on. Side decking can be very difficult, and if you're newer to the game, side decking just seems very overwhelming and pointless. I have a very close friend of mine who does play the game on a more casual level, who actually refuses to use his side deck. Like, he just, he's never used it. And one of my best friends, he's very, very stubborn about it. Shout out to Phil. He's a hilarious guy. He strictly plays Fluffles. Like, that's just the deck that he plays. I always get a kick out of some of the things that he says about the game. And the fact that he refuses to use his side deck is just even funnier. But this basically goes out to Phil. This is a little dedication to him for never side decking. So we're going to discuss the aspects that go into my side decking theory, especially with this deck. I think that it's important to discuss that. And I've basically separated things by our going first side and our going second side. So I feel that that's going to help us out a little bit. I think that, you know, talking about the going second side first might be a better idea. Now, a lot of these cards, like all 3 of these cards, can be sided in against most of the meta. That's something that I think is very important to your side deck, is that you want something that's versatile and something that works against a lot of different things, not just something that works against one. Because if you're only side decking for one deck, you're going to be able to counter only that one deck, and that's not what you want to do. You want to counter every single deck possible. So something like Evenly Matched can be really good against any back row strategy, which obviously is going to be helpful. We don't worry excessively about back row because we're playing back row too, and we can just play through their back row with our better back row, which is typically the way it works. So the Evenlies can be good against back row, can be good against decks that set up monster negations, but not like spell and trap negations. So keep in mind that's also very important. So Evenly has a lot of uses currently. I think that it's just one of the best side deck cards. Also, like right now, there are some people who are playing Eldritch, like just trap Eldritch, and this card alone just outs the deck if they don't have like a Judgment or something like that. So definitely get your Evenlies if you don't have them, because that card is insane. Moving on to the Dark Rulers, and talk about these. This card's really, really good against anything that's setting up a bunch of negations, or, you know, monsters that have all these different effects that are going to trigger on your turn. It's really good against something like Sword Soul, where they're going to set up a negation board. It's good against something like, you know, the Bird Up deck, because you can just negate their entire field. Also good against Drytron. It's just got so many uses. Sure, your opponent isn't going to take any damage, but if you can break their board after dropping this card, like if you were to open this card in Evenly and then a Tour Guide, like you just win the game. Like, you just flat out win the game. So playing the 3 Dark Ruler is very good to break boards. I wanted to play Droplet at first, but I thought about it, and I said to myself, you know, if I play Droplet, then I have to get rid of resources, and I don't want to get rid of resources in a trap-based deck, so I opted to stick with the Dark Rulers, and I think that they're actually super strong. So I'm going to stick with the Dark Rulers. I just think that it's too good. The Lava Golems, similar purpose to the Dark Rulers. Now, keep in mind, the Lava Golem is going to take up your normal summon when you tribute, but you are playing Burning Abyss cards, so if you open up Lava Golem and 2 BAs, you still can play the game. Like, you just go ahead and you sack over one of their cards, you make a Fortune Tune, you attack this defense, you take whatever damage you have to take, and then you just go into your Downward Magician and your Zeus, and you basically are just playing the game again. So Lava Golem is really good at outing cards that you don't want on the board. Keep in mind, it does not special summon either. It does count as your normal summon. So the fact that it doesn't count as a special summon, lets you play around the Wind Barrier statue, which is very important because the Wind Barrier statue does hurt the deck unless you do open a lot of trap cards to out it. So the Lava Golem is actually fantastic for many reasons. I really like this card. And if you're going close to time too, it's also good in time because you can just burn your opponent, which is crazy. If you can win with this card in time, that's even cooler. And this deck definitely does have potential to go into time because it's definitely a grindy deck. But those are all the going second cards. So let's talk a little bit about the going first cards. Now, the anti-spells, I feel that this doesn't need a lot of explaining. If you're playing against an opponent who has a lot of spell cards in their deck, this card's going to be your best friend. And it's going to help you out a whole lot against certain matchups such as Striker. Like Striker alone, this card is going to just win you so many games. You could flip this. They may chain like a Cyclone or something. And if you have the Imperial Order, then they're just going to have to scoop because they don't have anything else they can do. So keep in mind, Anti-Spell is fantastic. This card is just, it's so good. It's literally like the best side deck card for going first. So it's also good if your opponent does play like Lightning Storms or Feather Duster, because you can just flip this during standby and then they won't be able to activate them for a full turn, which is actually busted. So the anti-spells are one of the best sides. Then the Judgments. This is also very important. If you know your opponent is playing evenly, this card's going to be really good against evenly. It's going to be really good against Lightning Storms and, you know, Feather Duster too. Like, that's just the nature of this card. It's a very, very strong card. It can just out whatever you have to out. And, you know, playing a solid counter trap like that alongside the anti-spells going into like a game 2 or 3 is fantastic. Like, really, really strong. So don't sleep on those cards because they will definitely push your game forward. But that's basically the gist of the side deck. I think the side deck is fairly well rounded. It covers when we need to put cards in to go first, and it covers when we have to put cards in to go second. So that's obviously the ideal point of this deck, is that you want to have cards to stop it from, or stop your opponent from destroying your back row. You also want to have cards to break your opponent's board. So siding into any of those is fantastic. If you win the dice roll and you get to go first, then you should just be winning game 1 regardless. Like, this deck just does very, very well if you win the dice roll in game 1. Even if you lose the dice roll and they make you go second, you can always set up a bunch of back row and then they may not be able to play through the back row. So that's also something pretty important to note. But we're going to go ahead and basically talk a little bit about what we side out for certain matchups. So let's talk about our side outs. Okay, so I want to talk about the 8 cards that I would side out most with this deck. The cards that I think are probably the most easy cards to get rid of depending on the matchup you're playing against. Obviously, it's going to vary matchup to matchup, but in my experience, these cards, depending on your matchup, are the ones that you're going to side out the most. So something such as Ice Dragon's Prison may be a very strong card against a deck like Dragon Link or maybe like Bird Up, because you can just go ahead and get rid of their Lyrilusk strategy and they can't play. Against Dragon Link, as you know, you can get rid of all their dragons, which is very powerful. Like stuff like that. In like Sword Soul, if they're playing the Tenyi version, you can get rid of a lot of things too, which is fantastic. So IDP is good against decks like that. However, IDP against a deck like Drytron is not that great because you can't summon their Drytron cards from grave because of the Drytron summoning conditions. So I might side this out against a deck like Drytron, or if I'm playing against like a pure Tri-Brigade deck, they don't have like completely matching monster types, so it may not be good to play something like Ice Dragon's Prison because I'm not going to out as many cards. So keep in mind, there are certain matchups that IDP is good against, there are certain matchups it's not. So this is one of the more common cards that I would side out depending on the matchup. The Fiend Griefings. This is something that I think is pretty important to note, that this card is so strong against a card like DPE. However, if our opponent is playing a strategy that doesn't do like anything with their graveyard, there's almost no reason to be playing like Fiend Griefing. It won't do anything. So in certain matchups, siding this card out is actually your best case scenario. It's just not going to help you in certain matchups, especially if their deck is not graveyard reliant. A lot of decks that we come across now are going to have some sort of graveyard reliancy, so this card will have relevancy, but there are certain decks that it will not do anything against, so you might have to side this out. The Karma Cuts, I wanted to talk about this because everyone's going to say, well, you're siding out Karma Cut, why wouldn't you include Dynamiscus in this? And the reason for that is that if you're playing against a deck that's a little more trap heavy, Karma Cut doesn't do as much against trap heavy decks unless it's Eldritch and you can banish like multiple Golden Lords. Whereas Dynamiscus, you can get rid of not just monsters, but spells or traps too. So your Dynamiscus actually has a little more versatility than your Karma Cut. But Karma Cut can be good against certain decks, especially if they're putting multiple of the same names of monsters in their graveyard, then your Karma Cut is going to come in clutch. But against certain matchups, as I said, you know, you're not going to need this card as much because their deck may not put out as many monsters. So you need to just keep the Dynamiscus and out their spell cards, which is actually very strong. Now, the Call by the Grave, this is pretty important to note because if you are going second, this card really isn't that strong going second. There are going to be some matches that it is. Like if your opponent gets like a DP engraved, sure, it might be good to banish the DP. That's fine, I get it. But for the most part, if you're going second, this card is not going to do much. I'd rather be playing like another Evenly in my main deck over playing this card if I'm going second. Like it just seems better to be siding into an Evenly if you know you're going second rather than keeping this card in knowing that like it's not going to help out going second. Lastly is the Imperial Order, and this one, like, people are going to be like, why wouldn't you keep this card in? Well, the reason that you might not keep this card in is what if you get paired against like an Eldritch matchup or a super trap heavy deck? There's absolutely no reason to keep Imperial Order in against a super trap heavy deck. That just seems really stupid and is really stupid. So against your trap heavy matchups, you are going to side the Imperial Order out because you don't need it. A lot of times too, I think that the Call by the Grave is going to get sided out against trap decks too because they're not going to have a bunch of hand traps. They're just going to be playing more trap cards. So if you can side these two out for something like an Evenly, then you can out their back row, which is actually fantastic. So that's something to really note. So I wanted to just kind of discuss these 8 cards in particular. If you guys have seen the deck profile already, you basically know how the deck looks. I'm just going to run through it real quick so you guys can see essentially the cards that I'm playing. I'm not going to have it in any particular order. If you guys want to see it all in order, go ahead and watch the deck profile. It's obviously going to help you out. But I wanted to discuss these 8 cards. That way you guys can at least see what the most common cards for me to side out are. And, you know, from there, if you're siding in 9 cards, like let's say you're siding in your 3 Lava Golem, your 3 Dark Ruler, and your 3 Evenly, then like in doing so, you just pluck all of these cards out and you find one more card to take out. Usually I take out a random BA name, and the most common one for me personally is Alec. Alec is the most commonly sided out BA name whenever I play the deck. So like if I have to side out a BA, this is most likely the card that's coming out. There's not really another card in the deck that I feel could come out other than maybe like Barbar. Barbar is also another okay side out because if you're going second, sure, you have a little bit of burn damage, but who cares unless you're going towards time. Whereas like the Alec could possibly bait out a negation by trying to negate a monster effect on the field. So there are a couple different small little intricacies that I think are important to note with that. But looking at it in total, you have essentially 10 cards that you can side out depending on the match that you're playing against. Everything else, I think you should probably keep in the main deck. And I mean, if you're going first and you're going to be siding in Anti-Spell and Judgment, you're only getting rid of 6 of these cards, which you could very well, depending on the matchup, be getting rid of like 2 BAs, called by, and then like, you know, 3 other cards. Depends completely on the matchup, as I said. But, you know, you kind of have to gauge what you're playing against, figure out what works best against what you're playing against. But overall, we do have 10 spots that are a little more flexible as far as, you know, kind of switchability amongst your main deck and your side deck. So that's actually something very important I want to show you guys. So let's go ahead and jump on into the final bit of the video. So this is basically my little wrap-up bit here. I wanted to thank everyone for watching. I know this is going to be a longer video. I typically, when I do like test hand videos or instructional videos, I make them very in-depth and very long for a reason, because I want people to really get a look inside of my mind as to how I think when I play the deck. And I think that's very important because for people who are trying to learn how to play the deck at a higher pace and a higher level as far as competitive, you know, the competitive aspect goes, I think that getting that in-depth explanation is very helpful for people. And one of the things that I really strive to do, especially with Burning Abyss, is really show people how to play this deck, because this deck has so much potential to do crazy things all the time. Like, this deck is just insane, and people, for whatever reason, push this deck off to the side because it's 7 years old, or well, this year it'll be 8 years old, which is even crazier. I've been playing this deck since basically I started getting competitive in the game, which is insane. So, but yeah, overall, I think it's a fantastic deck that you can do a whole lot with. You can really set up some neat boards, some really interesting plays, which I think is a whole lot of fun. It's a very, a very simple deck, as I said, to kind of learn, but mastering it can be difficult. The side decking aspect, I think, is something that most people are going to feel most uncomfortable with, which is why I took a solid few minutes, probably 6 or 7 minutes, explaining my side deck reasonings. This is just something that I hold near and dear to my heart. I love doing this particular coaching lesson with Burning Abyss. It's always very, very fun. I know I've done one other Burning Abyss kind of how-to video in the past, and it's been very, very nice to do that. But before we wrap up the video, I also want to go ahead and thank every single person who has subscribed to the channel over the course of the past year. As I'm about to post this, or after I post this, I will most likely be hitting 1,000 subscribers, which honestly is a huge accomplishment. That was like my goal last year, was to pass 1,000 subscribers, and I think we were like 3 or 4 off when the new year hit. So I'll say that we basically got there. We were very close. We did better than I could have ever asked for, which is fantastic. I'm so thankful. It's been an absolute blast making videos and other content for this channel. I thoroughly enjoy it. I love being able to showcase my personal insight to certain decks and how I personally play them. Everyone's going to have their own style, so obviously you do whatever works for you. But for me, I'm just showing you guys how I do my personal thought process and how I kind of execute that in my games. So like I said, thank you very much, everyone who has subscribed. It's been an absolute fantastic past year doing this. I've really started to, kind of pump out the channel more and explain a whole lot more in-depth scenarios with certain decks, and really kind of show people how to play decks. I've gotten a lot of people who have reached out to me and have thanked me for showing them how to do, some of the things that I've been doing, and it means a lot to me. I don't play nearly as competitively as I used to. I play for basically fun now. I have decks that are competitive and I do fairly well still, but compared to where I was in like 2019, where I was topping every single regional that I went to, I don't play the game like that anymore. I show up to locals, I have some fun, talk with some friends, play some games, and head home. And I get to kick back and relax. And as most of you know, I am now engaged, so that's a very large commitment. And I love my fiance very much. Absolutely fantastic. She's so supportive. She encourages me to go play because it gets me out of the house to, kind of give myself a little fresh breath of air every once in a while. But I once again thank you guys so much. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I want everyone to have an absolutely great, fantastic, and healthy new year. And for right now, this is Team Yugi Feels signing out.